When I caught Karen, the HOA Queen Bee, behind the wheel of my Porsche 911, I never expected her to claim it was hers, because she's already driving it. Nestled in the rolling hills of Southern California, my ranch is more than just a home. It's my sanctuary. With sprawling acres of land, stables for horses, and breathtaking views that stretch as far as the eye can see, it's everything I've ever dreamed of. And then there's her, Karen, the self-appointed queen bee of our neighborhood's homeowners association, HOA. From day one, she made it clear she wasn't thrilled about me moving into her community, whether it was nitpicking about where I parked my tractor or sending passive-aggressive emails about maintaining property value. Karen had been nothing but trouble from the start. But even with her constant meddling, I never thought things would escalate this far. That all changed on a sunny Tuesday afternoon when I returned from an errand to find something missing, something irreplaceable. My Porsche 911, gleaming silver under the desert sun, was gone. At first, I assumed someone had broken into my garage or towed it by mistake. But what happened next defied every ounce of logic and reason I possessed. I decided to drive around the neighborhood, hoping against hope that maybe the car had been moved temporarily for some bizarre reason. As I turned onto Karen Street, my jaw dropped. There it was, the unmistakable silhouette of my Porsche 911 parked proudly in Karen's driveway. Not only was it there, but Karen herself was standing beside it, sipping coffee like she owned the damn thing. "What are you doing with my car?" I demanded, slamming my truck door shut. My voice carried across the quiet suburban cul-de-sac, drawing curious glances from neighbors peeking through their curtains. Karen didn't flinch. Instead, she gave me a smug smile, one of those condescending grins designed to make you feel small. "Oh, sweetie," she said, waving dismissively. "This isn't your car anymore. It's mine now." Her audacity left me speechless. For a moment, I wondered if I'd misheard her. "What do you mean, it's yours? I bought this car myself." "Well, technically speaking," Karen replied, crossing her arms over her chest, "possession is 9/10 of the law. And since I'm already driving it, well, let's just say it's practically mine already." When Karen first opened her mouth to explain herself, I half expected some sort of apology or backpedaling. After all, stealing a car is not exactly something most people would brazenly defend. But Karen wasn't like most people. She had built her entire identity around being the self-appointed moral compass of our neighborhood, and now she was doubling down on that persona with an audacity that bordered on sociopathic. Her justification for taking my Porsche 911 unfolded in layers, each more absurd than the last, until it became clear that this wasn't just about entitlement. It was about power, control, and her warped sense of fairness. Karen began by framing her actions as almost altruistic, as if she were doing me and the rest of the community a favor. "You really don't get it, do you?" she said, tilting her head slightly as though speaking to a child who couldn't grasp basic math. "This isn't about you. This is about everyone else. You drive this flashy, over-the-top sports car around like you're auditioning for a luxury car commercial, and meanwhile, the rest of us are busting our butts to keep this place looking nice." Her tone shifted between condescending and accusatory, painting herself as both victim and savior. To hear her tell it, owning a high-end vehicle made me complicit in some grand conspiracy to undermine the hard-working residents of our cul-de-sac. She went on to describe her role in the HOA in excruciating detail, as if reciting lines from a script she'd rehearsed dozens of times before. "Do you even know how much effort goes into running this neighborhood? Do you think these flower beds plant themselves, or that someone magically clears the gutters after every rainstorm? No, that's me. It's always been me. I'm the one who makes sure everything runs smoothly while the rest of you sit back and enjoy the benefits without lifting a finger." As she spoke, her voice grew louder, her gestures more exaggerated, as though she were trying to convince not just me, but the invisible audience of neighbors peeking through their curtains. But here's where things took a truly bizarre turn. Karen started arguing that because of all her alleged sacrifices, she deserved compensation, in the form of my car. "I've given so much to this community," she declared, pacing back and forth in front of the Porsche, as if it were a trophy she'd won. "And let's be honest, you probably don't even appreciate this thing. Look at it. It's impractical, ostentatious, and completely out of place in a neighborhood like ours. Meanwhile, I could actually put it to good use. I could take it to HOA meetings, show it off at fundraisers. It would inspire people to take pride in their homes." It was maddening to listen to her twist reality into knots. Not only was she refusing to acknowledge that the car belonged to me, but she was also rewriting history to cast herself as the hero of the story. In Karen's mind, she wasn't a thief. She was a redistributor of wealth, ensuring that resources, in this case, a luxury vehicle, were allocated to those who truly deserved them. The logic was so convoluted that it almost made sense, if you ignored the fact that theft is illegal and morally reprehensible. To further justify her behavior, Karen launched into a tirade about perceived inequalities within the neighborhood. "Why should you have all the fun?" she demanded, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You roll up in your fancy car, acting like you're better than everyone else, while the rest of us struggle to make ends meet. Does that seem fair to you? Because it doesn't seem fair to me." Here, she paused for dramatic effect, letting her words sink in. "If anything, taking this card is the most equitable thing I have ever done. Think of it as leveling the playing field." Leveling the playing field. The phrase echoed in my head, bouncing off the walls of absurdity. If anything, Karen's actions were widening the gap between right and wrong, exposing the toxic mindset that had likely fueled her behavior for years. What struck me most was how deeply ingrained her sense of entitlement had become. She genuinely believed that her position as HOA president granted her special privileges, including the right to seize property from others if it suited her agenda. It wasn't enough for her to dictate what color we painted our houses or how tall our grass could grow. Now she wanted to dictate who got to own what. As Karen continued her rant, I noticed subtle shifts in her demeanor. At times, she seemed almost giddy, relishing the opportunity to air grievances she'd clearly been harboring for months. Other times, her expression darkened, revealing glimpses of anger and resentment beneath the surface. It occurred to me then that this wasn't just about my Porsche. It was about control. For Karen, the HOA served as a platform to exert dominance over her neighbors, micromanaging their lives under the guise of maintaining order. By taking my car, she was sending a message. No one was above her authority, not even me. Her twisted logic reached its peak when she tried to invoke legal principles to support her claim. "You know what they say," she announced smugly, folding her arms across her chest. "Possession is 9/10 of the law. And since this car is currently in my possession, and I'd already driven it, by the way, that means it practically belongs to me now." The sheer audacity of this statement left me speechless. Not only was she misinterpreting a common adage, but she was using it to rationalize outright theft. If possession truly equaled ownership, then anyone could simply walk into a store, grab whatever they wanted, and declare it theirs based on the same reasoning. At this point, I realized there was no reasoning with Karen. Her worldview was too skewed, too rooted in delusions of grandeur and misplaced righteousness. Any attempt to appeal to logic or morality would fall on deaf ears. Instead, I focused on gathering evidence to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Porsche was mine. Registration papers, purchase receipts, security footage, all of it would come in handy when the authorities arrived. Because despite Karen's best efforts to rewrite reality, facts are stubborn things, and they would ultimately prevail. Looking back on that surreal confrontation, I can't help but marvel at the lengths Karen went to justify her actions. Her twisted logic revealed far more about her character than any amount of yelling or posturing ever could. Beneath the polished exterior and carefully curated image lay a person consumed by envy, insecurity, and a desperate need for validation. In her quest to assert dominance over the neighborhood, she lost sight of basic decency and empathy. And in the end, her downfall was inevitable, not because I defeated her, but because her own hubris sealed her fate. The lesson I took away from this experience was twofold. First, never underestimate the lengths to which some people will go to impose their will on others. Second, always stand firm in defending what's rightfully yours, because bullies thrive on weakness and hesitation. As for Karen, her reign of terror came to an abrupt end shortly thereafter, leaving behind a trail of gossip and disbelief. But for me, the memory of her standing beside my stolen Porsche, spouting nonsense about fairness and possession, remains a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ego and misplaced entitlement. As Karen's twisted logic unfolded in the middle of her driveway, it became increasingly clear that this wasn't just a private dispute between two neighbors. It was rapidly escalating into a public spectacle. Word travels fast in suburban neighborhoods, especially when drama involves something as eye-catching as a stolen Porsche 911. Before long, curious onlookers began to gather, drawn by the raised voices and the unmistakable sight of my gleaming sports car parked conspicuously in Karen's domain. What started as a tense standoff between me and Karen quickly morphed into a community-wide confrontation, with our neighbors stepping forward to voice their opinions, some supportive, others amused, but all eager to weigh in. The first person to break the silence was Mrs. Jenkins, a retired teacher who had lived on the street for decades. She was known for her quiet demeanor and diplomatic approach to conflict resolution, qualities that made her one of the few residents immune to Karen's usual intimidation tactics. As she stepped forward, clutching her gardening gloves, there was an air of calm authority about her. "Karen, dear," she began gently, her tone measured and firm, "stealing isn't the answer. No matter how frustrated you are with your responsibilities or how much work you put into the HOA, taking someone else's belongings is wrong." Her words hung in the air like a gavel striking its block, punctuating the absurdity of Karen's actions. For a brief moment, I thought they might penetrate her thick shell of self-righteousness. But instead of acknowledging the truth, Karen shot back with a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "Stay out of this, Doris," she snapped, using Mrs. Jenkins' first name in a way that felt deliberately dismissive. "You wouldn't understand. Nobody understands how hard I work around here." It was classic Karen, deflecting accountability by portraying herself as a misunderstood martyr, perpetually underappreciated despite her supposed sacrifices. But Mrs. Jenkins wasn't deterred. She simply adjusted her glasses and gave Karen a look that said more than any lecture ever could. It was the kind of glance reserved for unruly students or stubborn children, a mix of disappointment and pity that left no room for argument. Her intervention set the tone for what followed, emboldening other neighbors to speak up. One by one, they emerged from behind hedges, porches, and garage doors, transforming the scene into an impromptu neighborhood tribunal. Among them was Mr. Thompson, a retired mechanic who always wore grease-stained overalls and carried a perpetual smirk. He leaned casually against his mailbox, arms crossed, clearly enjoying the show. "Actually, Karen," he chimed in, his gravelly voice cutting through the tension, "we all understand exactly how hard you work to make everyone else miserable." His comment earned scattered laughter from the crowd, breaking the awkward heaviness of the moment. Even some of Karen's closest allies struggled to suppress smiles, though they tried valiantly to maintain their poker faces. For Karen, this was nothing short of betrayal. Her face flushed red, whether from embarrassment or anger, or both. It was impossible to tell. She stomped her foot like a child throwing a tantrum, pointing accusingly at Mr. Thompson. "That's not true. I've dedicated years of my life to improving this neighborhood, and this is the thanks I get. Ridicule? Mockery?" Her voice cracked slightly, betraying a flicker of vulnerability beneath her bravado. It was the first time I'd seen her facade crack, revealing the fragile ego hidden underneath. Yet even as Karen spiraled into defensive outrage, The tide of public opinion continued to turn against her. Another neighbor, a young mother named Lisa, stepped forward holding her toddler on her hip. "Karen," she said softly but firmly, "nobody's denying that you've worked hard. But stealing a car, that's crossing a line. You can't just take things because you feel entitled to them. That's not how the world works." Lisa's words struck a chord, perhaps because they came from someone whose judgment couldn't easily be dismissed. Unlike the older generation of homeowners, Lisa represented a newer wave of residents, younger, pragmatic, and less tolerant of Karen's theatrics. Her presence underscored a growing divide within the community. Those who still clung to the old guard's rigid rules versus those who wanted a more collaborative, inclusive approach to neighborhood governance. By siding with me, Lisa signaled that Karen's grip on power was slipping, and everyone knew it. Even the quieter members of the crowd found subtle ways to express their disapproval. Some nodded in agreement with Lisa's remarks. Others exchanged knowing glances or whispered comments behind cupped hands. A few pulled out their phones to snap photos or record videos, ensuring that the incident would live on in digital infamy. Social media, after all, has a way of amplifying moments like these, turning local disputes into viral sensations overnight. While I hadn't intended to create a scene, I couldn't deny the satisfaction of watching Karen squirm under the collective gaze of her peers. Amidst the murmurs and chuckles, Karen grew increasingly agitated. She paced back and forth in front of the Porsche, gesturing wildly as if trying to rally support for her cause. "Fine," she shouted finally, throwing up her hands in exasperation. "Believe what you want, but unless he can prove this car belongs to him, it stays right here." Her declaration was met with a mixture of groans and eye rolls, underscoring just how far removed from reality she had become. Ownership documents were irrelevant to her now. What mattered most was saving face. What fascinated me most about this moment was how quickly the dynamics of power shifted. Just minutes earlier, Karen had been standing tall, convinced of her righteousness and invincibility. Now, surrounded by skeptical neighbors and armed with only her increasingly tenuous arguments, she looked small and isolated. The very people she claimed to serve, the ones she often bullied into compliance, were now turning against her en masse. It was a textbook example of hubris meeting its match, and it served as a reminder that communities are stronger together than any single individual, no matter how domineering they may seem. In the end, the neighbors' collective intervention did more than expose Karen's hypocrisy. It also reinforced a sense of solidarity among the rest of us. Standing there amidst the chaos, I realized that while Karen's antics were outrageous, they weren't entirely surprising. People like her thrive on division, fear, and control, preying on the insecurities of others to maintain their status quo. But when confronted with unity and courage, their foundations crumble. Our shared willingness to stand up to her marked a turning point, not just for me personally, but for the entire neighborhood. As the confrontation drew to a close, the crowd began to disperse, leaving behind a palpable sense of change in the air. Some neighbors offered me sympathetic pats on the back or words of encouragement. Others lingered to exchange theories about what Karen might do next. Regardless of their specific reactions, one thing was certain: Karen's reign of terror was over. Her attempt to justify her theft had backfired spectacularly, exposing her not as the benevolent leader she claimed to be, but as a petty, vindictive bully whose days of unchecked authority were numbered. And as I stood beside my reclaimed Porsche, watching her retreat into her house in defeat, I couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of hope, not just for myself, but for the future of our community. The resolution of the Porsche theft saga unfolded in ways that were both predictable and deeply satisfying. After calling the police and filing a formal report, officers arrived at Karen's house within the hour, their presence adding an official weight to the situation that had been sorely lacking during her theatrical justifications. When they examined the registration records and confirmed beyond a doubt that the car belonged to me, Karen's protests dissolved into sputtering indignation. She tried one last desperate attempt to argue her case, something about community stewardship and redistributing resources, but even she seemed to realize how futile it was. In the end, she handed over the keys with barely concealed resentment, muttering under her breath about how unfair life was. As I slid behind the wheel of my reclaimed Porsche, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and vindication. The ordeal had been exhausting, not only because of the emotional toll, but also because it forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and community dynamics. While I was grateful to have my car back, the experience left me reflecting on the broader implications of what had transpired, and the lessons I'd learned along the way. One of the most striking takeaways was the importance of standing up for oneself, even in the face of overwhelming audacity or intimidation. When Karen first claimed ownership of my Porsche, part of me hesitated. Was it worth making a scene? Would anyone believe me over her, given her long-standing role as HOA president? But backing down would have meant surrendering not just my property, but also my dignity. By refusing to let her rewrite reality, I sent a clear message. No matter how entitled someone might act, there are lines that cannot and should not be crossed. This lesson extended beyond the immediate conflict. It reminded me that asserting boundaries is essential in every area of life, whether dealing with bullies, manipulators, or simply difficult personalities. Another critical insight came from observing how the neighborhood responded to Karen's actions. Initially, I worried that her influence as HOA president might sway people to side with her, or at least stay silent out of fear of retaliation. But the opposite happened. Neighbors who had previously tolerated her behavior finally found the courage to speak out, exposing cracks in her carefully constructed facade of authority. Their collective intervention wasn't just a moral victory for me. It was a turning point for the entire community. It demonstrated the power of unity and the importance of holding individuals accountable, regardless of their perceived status or power. Communities thrive when people stand together against injustice, and this incident proved that even the most entrenched hierarchies can crumble under the weight of shared resolve. Karen's downfall also highlighted the dangers of unchecked ego and entitlement. Throughout the confrontation, she clung stubbornly to the belief that her contributions to the HOA somehow justified her actions. Her inability to see the bigger picture or admit fault ultimately led to her undoing. Watching her spiral into defensiveness and denial reinforced the idea that unchecked pride blinds people to their own flaws. Had Karen been willing to reflect on her motivations and acknowledge the harm she caused, she might have salvaged some semblance of respect. Instead, her refusal to accept responsibility transformed her from a figure of authority into a cautionary tale. On a personal level, the experience taught me to appreciate the value of patience and documentation. During the investigation, having concrete evidence, registration papers, security footage, witness statements, made all the difference. These tools not only validated my claims but also exposed Karen's lies for what they were: baseless fabrications designed to deflect blame. Moving forward, I resolved to always keep meticulous records of important transactions and interactions, recognizing that preparation is key to navigating disputes effectively. Life is unpredictable, and while you can't control other people's behavior, you can arm yourself with the resources needed to protect your rights. Perhaps the most profound realization, however, was the reminder that humor and perspective go a long way in diffusing tension. Despite the seriousness of the situation, there were moments of levity that helped lighten the mood. Whether it was Mr. Thompson's sarcastic quips or the sight of neighbors snapping photos like paparazzi at a red carpet event, these small acts of solidarity not only made the confrontation more bearable, but also underscored the absurdity of Karen's actions. Laughter has a unique ability to strip away pretense and remind us of our shared humanity, even in the midst of conflict. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood underwent a subtle transformation. With Karen stripped of her HOA presidency and eventually moving out altogether, a sense of renewal swept through the cul-de-sac. New leadership emerged, prioritizing collaboration over control and fostering a spirit of inclusivity rather than division. Gone were the nitpicky emails about mailbox colors or lawn length. In their place came initiatives to beautify common spaces and organize social events that brought residents closer together. The change wasn't overnight, but it was undeniable, a testament to the fact that communities can evolve when given the opportunity. For me personally, reclaiming my Porsche felt symbolic of reclaiming my peace of mind. The car itself was more than just a possession. It represented freedom, hard work, and the joy of achieving something I'd dreamed of for years. Seeing it parked in my driveway again served as a daily reminder that resilience pays off and that justice, though sometimes delayed, is worth pursuing. More importantly, the experience strengthened my connection to my neighbors, forging bonds that transcended mere proximity. We weren't just a collection of houses anymore. We were a community united by shared values and mutual support. Looking back, I realized that the stolen Porsche incident wasn't just about a car or a petty feud. It was a microcosm of larger themes: the tension between individual rights and communal responsibilities, the corrosive effects of unchecked power, and the enduring strength of collective action. Karen may have believed she was untouchable, but in the end, her actions revealed the fragility of her position. Karma, as cliched as it sounds, truly does catch up with those who abuse their privilege. And for the rest of us, the story serves as a powerful reminder that integrity, courage, and solidarity can overcome even the most brazen attempts at manipulation. So yes, my Porsche still shines brighter than ever, its gleaming surface reflecting not just sunlight, but the triumph of truth over deceit. Every time I drive it down the winding roads of my ranch, I'm reminded of the lessons I learned, and the neighbors who stood by me when it mattered most. In the grand scheme of things, the ordeal may have been a minor blip in the timeline of my life, but its impact will linger far longer than the memory of a stolen car.